I just cannot imagine having to go to work on Monday morning at some sort of an office job maybe, and your colleague Sandra reminds you that you said you were going to the theatre over the weekend on Friday, and she asks you how it was, and you have to decide how to tell this poor woman that you were forcibly removed from the venue by the police because you got in a fight with the staff while some poor drama school graduate is on the stage trying to sing Can't Take My Eyes Off You. Oh my god, hey! Welcome back to my Stagey YouTube channel. If you are meeting me for the first time, hello there! My name is Mickey Jo and I am obsessed with all things theatre. I'm an independent professional theatre critic here in the UK and I'm also a Stagey YouTuber. And today's video is a very long time coming. Unfortunately, it's a very long time coming because for the longest time, people have been asking me to talk about audience behaviour and theatre etiquette, whatever that may be, and there's a lot to unpack here, but the reason I'm sat down talking to you about this today is because I was waiting for the right time to bring this up, and I was hoping to tie it in with some sort of topical conversation, and right now, as luck would have it, we are talking about poor audience behaviour on both sides of the Atlantic, because there have been many recent events, both on Broadway and in theatres in the UK, where bad audience behaviour has brought this conversation to the forefront. So today we are going to be discussing terrible audience behaviour in the theatre and why it feels like it's gotten so much worse since the pandemic. Ahead of today's video, I actually want to make another one where I respond to and react to some stories that any of you might have about really dreadful audience behaviour, so comment down below with the worst things that you have ever witnessed being perpetrated by other audience members in the theatre, and we can all be horrified and fascinated. Also, if you enjoyed today's video, make sure to go and subscribe to my Stagey YouTube channel. I have plenty more theatrical content that you can enjoy right after you've finished watching this one. And if you would like to see my videos before everybody else, as well as getting to see some exclusive content, you can become one of my YouTube members. If you click on the first link in the description of this video for just £2.99 a month, you get access to all of that good stuff. Now, let's talk about the declining standards of audience behaviour, also known as why you could not pay me to be an usher. So I personally, in my lifetime of theatre going, have not witnessed all that much dreadful audience behaviour, but I'm not a very good indicator of how normal it is because I tend to go to the theatre on a press night where much of the audience may be invited guests and friends and family or critics or agents or other industry peeps. And also, when I do actually buy tickets to go and see something, I tend to avoid certain performances. Essentially, what I will usually do is there are a few shows that I just wouldn't go and see on a Friday or a Saturday night. I'll chance a weekend matinee because people don't tend to have gotten trashed out of their mind before 2:30 in the afternoon, but honestly, you never know. So even that feels like a risk with certain shows. And it's not the fault of those shows, but there is a bit of a correlation. We're going to discuss that in today's video. So what exactly are we talking about when we talk about poor audience behavior? Are we talking about people using their phones to film? Are we talking about people just being on their phones and being disinterested, talking through the show, nudging the back of your seat? How severe are these issues? Because with this dialogue, every time that this gets talked about, people talk about audience members feeling policed and this idea of elitism within the theatre. And I want to be mindful of that. You know, I want the theatre to be accessible for all sorts of people. And there are shows that do relaxed performances, and that's fantastic. If we're talking about people on the autistic spectrum, people who, for various reasons, whether it's to do with disability or otherwise, aren't necessarily able to sit and remain in one seat for the duration of a performance. They may need to leave, they may need to come and go. And so relaxed performances offer a level of increased accessibility. However, these are only on very specific dates, so that in and of itself is not completely accessible. And I'm a little bit guilty of this. I am annoyingly easily distracted if people are having like a whispery conversation near me, or if a phone light flashes up sort of in my peripheral, it is definitely going to at least momentarily draw me out of whatever it is that I'm trying to focus on a stage. So I find it annoying, but I also don't think that we should be policing audience behaviour to the nth degree because we want to be inviting more people into the theatre. That being said, we're not talking today about these little things. We are talking about like dreadful, awful, questionably illegal audience behaviour. So let's get right into it. This is something that happened in the UK a few weeks ago in Edinburgh at a touring production of Jersey Boys. Here we go. I'm reading from edinburghlive.co.uk. Edinburgh production of The Jersey Boys halted after brawl breaks out in audience. Is it called The Jersey Boys? I feel like it's just called Jersey Boys. That's not the point. So, members of staff at the Edinburgh Playhouse had to stop the altercation that had broken out in the theatre after what appeared to be a full-on fist fight up in the balcony took place around 30 minutes before the sold-out production was due to end. So this is in the second act. That could be when he was singing You're Just Too Good to Be True. I was joking, but that's about when that is in the show, and that really is the high point of the show, so you're only cheating yourselves by having a fight during it. Nor do I feel like there's anything in Jersey Boys that really ought to incite anyone to physical violence. Like, we all have strong opinions about these shows, but it's never made me that aggressive. Those in attendance say that the scuffle kicked off after two audience members were being rowdy throughout the show, which sparked criticism from others in attendance. See, this is my fear, is that I will tell someone that they are being too loud, or can they please stop, like, sending WhatsApp messages on their phone with brightness on full, and that they're just going to punch me in the face. This is what I live in fear of. Workers at the venue had pleaded with the alleged guilty parties to tone it down, but it soon turned into a violent confrontation, with one male appearing to resist and throw punches at staff. Like, how emboldened and entitled do you have to be to feel like it's okay to punch staff members at a theatre who, I guarantee to you, I don't care what theatre you're working for, I don't care what part of the country you're in, the ushers are not being paid enough. Anywhere, if this is the stuff that they are dealing with, I guarantee you. Onlookers say that officers were called in and that the performance had to be stopped in order to allow both police and staff to tackle the fight. I mean, wow. When it's at the level that you actually have to call the police in order to break up a fight between people in the auditorium. And again, I'm all for bringing new types of audiences into the theatre, but this is not the type of audience member that we necessarily want to be bringing into the theatre. So when I told you it was not like mildly distracting stuff that we were going to be talking about in today's video, I meant it. We are talking about audience behaviour getting so dreadful that people are breaking into fights in the middle of the theatre, the performance is having to be stopped on stage. Imagine being that performer or being whoever was on stage at that moment and noticing that a fight is breaking out in the auditorium. I heard about this just the other day. This wasn't reported on, but I think it was Moulin Rouge that people were saying the actors themselves took the initiative to stop and walk off stage because they noticed that a fight was happening. Or, I mean, I've heard these things various times. Since we came out of the pandemic, I've been hearing more and more of these stories about it happening at Mamma Mia, about it happening at The Drifter's Girl, about it happening at Tina. And you'll notice, as I'm talking through all of these, consistently I'm talking about a certain type of musical. Now, I don't want to besmirch the name of jukebox musicals, and I don't think it's their fault. I don't think there's something inherently about jukebox musicals that is making people behave terribly, but it is potentially attracting a less regular theatre goer to the theatre. These people are maybe going for a night out, and this is the one time they're going to go into London and see a West End show of the year, and they're going to have a really great time, and they have spent a lot on tickets because ticket prices are rising. And one of the side effects of that we have to be aware of when we're charging more for these tickets is that people really need to have a great time. With these prices getting so high, they can only afford to go to the theatre once this year, and they are determined to have a great time, and so they are drinking heavily, not just at the theatre, before they get to the theatre. And we're going to talk some more about this later because it's an observation that has been made by front of house staff, but people are pre-gaming for the West End shows and for the Broadway shows, and this is where a lot of the issues seem to be coming from, is that people are turning up so drunk that they are behaving dreadfully and they don't really have enough self-awareness of their own dreadful behaviour. Because I feel like if these audience members had turned up sober, it's not going to devolve into a fist fight. Not at Jersey Boys. Not at the Jersey Boys. Come on now. So in response to this, a statement was issued by the Edinburgh Playhouse's theatre director Colin Marr. I'm reading this via whatsonstage.com, and here it is. Enough is enough! Exclamation mark. He's not messing around. I am disgusted and angry with the unacceptable audience behaviour that my team has had to endure in recent weeks. They have been verbally and physically assaulted by a small number of audience members while trying to do their job. 2 weeks ago, one of my staff was punched. This week, one of them was pushed and spat on. Pushed and spat on. Oh my god. This is becoming far too regular an occurrence, not just in our theatre but in venues across the UK. Speak on it, Colin. There is a very small minority of people who come to our theatre and choose to sing, dance and talk throughout the show in a manner that disturbs others. In the past few years, I have started seeing signs in the foyer and announcements at the beginning of the show asking people, specifically usually at jukebox shows, not to sing. Again, this is an issue only that the jukebox shows are having because in non-jukebox shows, the audience don't necessarily know the songs. I was at Pretty Woman today, and we were talking about the fact that you're not getting the audience singing along throughout the show because they don't know the songs. It's not a jukebox score. But at a We Will Rock You, at a Dirty Dancing, at a Mamma Mia, maybe that's something that you have to contend with. Although I say that, it was at Dreamgirls that I noticed this, just before Christmas. The UK tour of Dreamgirls in Birmingham had a sign in the foyer asking people not to sing along. And still, there was a group of women singing along who got told off by another group near them and then were loudly complaining at it the whole walk down the stairwell afterwards. And they literally said, oh, I didn't know suddenly it was a rule that you're not meant to sing when you come to the theatre, even though it was. It was a sign in the foyer, but apparently drunk people can't read anymore. Anyway, Colin, where were we? There is a very small minority of people who come to our theatre and choose to sing, dance and talk throughout the show in a manner that disturbs others. I don't know if you can sing, dance and talk in a manner that doesn't disturb others, but that's fine. They either don't know or don't care. It's the second one. How much this spoils their fellow audience members' experience. When one of my team asks them politely to stop, they become verbally abusive and, in some cases, physical. This is not acceptable. I mean, people just don't like to be challenged. I remember seeing this on late night trains coming back from London, back when I used to live a little bit further away, and I would come in to London to see West End shows, and there would be a quiet carriage and you'd get loud drunken people, and one other person on the train would politely remind them, and people would get so angry and so frustrated and so emboldened and say like, oh, what a boring person you are, what a boring life you must have. And it's so pointless and it's so dumb, and you know for a fact that those people are waking up the next morning just feeling so embarrassed about their ridiculous, ludicrous behaviour. And that's with no police involved whatsoever. Like, that adds an extra level of foolishness and shame. I'm asking that when you come to our venue that you are considerate towards your fellow audience members and our members of staff so that we can all enjoy the wonderful entertainment on stage. There's a great amount of trust that goes into the theatrical communion and being part of an audience, and the trust between a performer and the audience, and it does just make the whole thing very, very difficult when you have people behaving in this way. Please be in no doubt that if you are abusive towards our staff, you will be asked to leave. And if you are threatening, intimidating, or physically abusive, we will call the police and you will be banned from our theatre and all ATG venues. Now, ATG owns an awful lot of theatres, so, you know, that is no empty threat. But I do think that part is the key. And as we're going to go on to talk about a little bit more, I think that possibly theatres need to become a little bit more comfortable in removing certain people from an audience, especially before it escalates to such a point that a fight breaks out and the police need to be called. But how do you support your front of house team in making that decision and being able to do that without placing them in harm's way? That's the question. So evidently, this is not just happening in one theatre in Edinburgh, like Colin just told us, but also it's not just happening in the UK. So Playbill recently published an article about audience behaviour in which they were interviewing various members of front of house staff. That article was subsequently removed from their website, but we're going to talk about all of that momentarily. First of all, I want to read you some excerpts from it because it has since been unearthed. So the very striking title was Physical Assault, Vomit in the Aisles, Stalking in the Streets, Why Audience Misbehaviour Has Gotten Out of Hand. And it's worth saying that if we're saying this has gotten worse, it was pretty bad before in a lot of places. Since Broadway's reopening in 2021, there has been a notable spike in audience misbehaviour, ranging from constant phone ringing and talking over the show to verbal and physical altercations with other patrons and intervening staff members. While statistics are not publicly maintained on these incidents, the spike is undeniable. For well over a year, social media has been aflutter with anecdotal reports, with the occasional incident reaching the front page, such as when Death of a Salesman star Wendell Pierce had to calm down an irate patron from the stage. This was crazy because this got filmed a little bit, and you have Wendell Pierce on stage in the second act trying to reason with this incredibly angry audience member who was holding up this entire theatre with this rant and had interrupted the performance to such a degree that they are in full conversation with the actor on stage. I mean, how self-involved do you need to be to feel like you're that much of the main character that you're able to do that in your life? I would die. I would personally die. So in this Playbill article, they meet with various ushers. Here is what one of them said. "I have never felt more demeaned in a job than I do as an usher. I'm a queer, gender non-conforming person of colour. Do you have any idea how high of a bar that is to cross? It's like we aren't even human to these people." This is from a former actor turned front of house worker who began working at a family-friendly musical in the winter of 2021. I'll let you all speculate on what that might be. "Since beginning the position, they have been spat on, shoved, had my arse slapped, and been screamed at more times than I could count. Still, they consider themselves lucky. One of their co-workers was shoved down a staircase by an irate patron, resulting in a serious hip injury. Oh my god." They go on to say, "It's terrifying. Since when does taking tickets and leading people to their seats involve blunt force trauma?" Yeah! Oh my, wow. They recalled once a patron spat on them after being told to pull up their mask when face coverings were still required during the pandemic. I mean, honestly, how was I supposed to respond to that? I mean, the fact that this was mid-pandemic and they were still masking and that you're spitting on someone, that's so much more loaded. I mean, dreadful, dreadful anyway. They said, "I just stood there dumbfounded, unable to understand what had just happened. Like, isn't that technically a biological weapon threat?" I mean, this is the thing. When masks were being required in theatres, I went to a lot of theatre here in the UK where you had to wear a mask, and it was definitely contentious. And at every single performance I was at, there was always at least someone. There'd be a few people trying to get away with not wearing their mask properly, or not bringing it or taking it off once the show started. It was this whole thing. People do not like to be told what to do in a way they aren't anticipating. And a great many people, even who are used to the theatre and who are used to what they understand to be the rules of engagement when it comes to being at the theatre, because that was new, because that was different, they weren't prepared to comply with it. And people have had their own whole spectrum of opinions when it comes to mask wearing, but essentially, if you are being asked to do something with provisions for those who were not able to for various medical reasons, but if you are being asked to do something in order to access an activity, then that is the expectation that is being made of you. I think people are so entitled to feel as though they conduct themselves however they choose. This whole thing with masks, where they were saying no one can ask them to wear a mask in a theatre. It's like how you're asked to wear shoes in restaurants or you're not going to be served. I don't know why when it comes to wearing masks, or why when it comes to going into a theatre, that people feel like they have this level of freedom and they don't have to adhere to certain expectations within society. You do. Your behaviour still has to comply with regulations. That's just called being a human being and existing in the world. You can't walk around naked either, unless it's hair and you're on the stage. They don't like it when the audience does it. That would be too immersive. The shift has affected far more than the theatre industry. Psychologists are now years into doctoral studies of the sharp spike in inconsiderate and oftentimes violent behaviour, with researchers speaking with NPR, The Atlantic and more about reversed maturity, which has caused some people's personalities to backslide to that of a demanding child, unable to properly engage with empathy. Fascinating. I mean, do we think that this is post-COVID? Is that what they're saying here? We're just not meant to live under this level of tension for such a prolonged period. This is from Vale Wright, Senior Director of Healthcare Innovation for the American Psychological Association. We aren't able to regulate our emotions as well as we could before. That's fascinating. That's fascinating to me. I mean, having been a teacher and teaching young people pre- and post-pandemic and mid-pandemic, there was a definite change in classroom behaviour, and again, I would describe it as entitlement, the way that people were coming back in and had become used when they were engaging with learning from home, they'd become used to being able to control so much of their immediate environment. So they just weren't prepared to be asked to do certain very reasonable things, or they wanted to be able to sit exactly where they wanted to and disengage and eat what they want and do what they want and get out their phones and all of these things. And so it doesn't really surprise me that audiences have been rebelling against the system in the same way post-pandemic. It was for such an unprecedentedly long period that we were all shut away from all of this stuff that, again, I mean, you could talk about underlying tensions and those rising to the surface. I think you could also talk about people just forgetting how to properly behave themselves and conduct themselves in public. Oh gosh, okay, so the next person being interviewed is Molly, who served as a COVID safety manager for 9 months at multiple different Broadway theatres. I can't even imagine what they had to deal with. Oh gosh. So to Molly, COVID was more than a trauma trigger. It gave people permission to be the worst version of themselves without any regard for anyone around them. As Molly put it, being a front of house COVID safety manager was like being paid to be bullied. And probably not paid enough. Is anything enough to be paid to be bullied? I don't think anything's enough for that. 2 particular incidents immediately came to mind for Molly when asked to identify misbehaviour. One night, I caught a woman eating mango slices. I asked if she could take it to one of our eating areas upstairs or if she could put it away. Reasonable. She quite literally turned red and screamed, "I'm just sucking on it," before throwing a mango slice at me and running away. I shouldn't be laughing at that because that's traumatizing, but something about this woman just screaming, throwing a mango at someone and running. It sounds like a cartoon, doesn't it? Like, this is not normal human behaviour. I have never thrown a mango at another human being, let alone in a theatre. I mean, I wouldn't even do that on a playground. Who's chucking mangoes in the stalls? Who's doing that? While that one-sided food fight is humorous in hindsight, oh good, it's not just me, another incident where 2 patrons screamed and cursed at her for daring to ask them to properly wear their masks, see, it doesn't surprise me, was far more harrowing. I asked her to put on her mask and she screamed, "You're harassing me, you're following me," and without missing a beat, the man next to her started screaming at me as well, "Get away from her." While he was screaming himself hoarse, I noticed he had a hole cut in his mask. When Molly went to find a house manager to de-escalate the situation, other audience members had to intervene. In spite of their behaviour and their constant verbal barrage of insults at Molly, the couple was not told to leave the theatre. This is the issue. If someone is going to be so rude and so abusive to one of your staff, and you then let them stay, not only does it tell those people that they can behave that way and be allowed to stay in the theatre, that this isn't going to be an issue, it tells everyone else who bore witness to that moment that that's fine. And that's something, again, I'm going to talk about my experience as a teacher, because if you let one student get away with that bad behaviour and everyone else sees, then it's just become a thing. Everyone knows that they can do that in the future, either consciously or subconsciously. That's why you have to clamp down on bad behaviour, not just for that one individual, but for the principle of the thing. And also, advocate for your front of house staff, people. Not only are these ushers not paid enough and given far too much agonising and harrowing work that we're hearing, but to then know that management doesn't have your back in these instances, that's just dreadful, isn't it? Like, that's got to be so disappointing. When they started another fight after the show with one of Molly's co-workers, Molly was instructed to leave it alone. For the foreseeable future, I was told to stop reporting instances after that night because it was too depressing. I did, and it was. My gosh. In all of Molly's tenure, oh my gosh, this is blowing my mind. In all of Molly's tenure, not a single patron was ever removed from the theatre. Managers instructed them to step away from the situation when a patron became abusive. That's because the venue don't want to be liable for the ushers getting attacked. That's what that is. But the patron was never instructed to leave the theatre. My goodness. Another usher who works at a tourist favourite production can count the number of patrons that have been asked to exit the theatre on one hand. And here is one particularly terrifying incident. Oh, I'm nervous to even read this. In May 2022, a man was immediately flagged as worrisome by the front of house team upon entering with his family, getting into aggressive verbal debates over the theatre's vaccine and mask requirement. Again, I don't know why people do this when they're with family as well. Like, it's just going to ruin your entire day, isn't it? Eventually, he acquiesced to wearing a mask, but throughout the performance, he entered and exited through the lobby doors, clearly antsy and unable to sit still. There's a point right before intermission where we don't allow patrons to go back to their seats for the safety of the actors and a dangerous effect. I feel like I can now work out what show this is. I don't want to say it and I don't want to speculate, but I feel like we can all work out what show this is. It requires me to stand in front of the doors for those last couple of minutes. This man comes barreling around the corner, and when I tell him he can't go inside, he gets in my face, grabs me, and throws me through the other side of the doors. I smashed my back on the handle and my shoulder against the door as he burst past me to re-enter the theatre. Oh my God. I was just laying there, out of it, when my manager came around the corner. She got a hold of the security team, and they rounded him and his family up during intermission and took them out the back door. It had to get that bad for someone to be removed. I mean, that's just staggering, isn't it? That's literally assault by the sounds of it. This person considered themselves lucky to have had a security team to rely on. In some other Broadway houses, it would have been up to the ushers themselves to remove a dangerous patron had that decision been made. This is a quote from another usher. "If we intervene with the wrong person, I fear that someone could be seriously permanently harmed. I've been grabbed so hard I've had bruises for a week. What's stopping them from grabbing my neck that hard or slamming my head against a wall? We don't have a security team. Are my co-workers supposed to start training in wound care and defensive strategy?" Good grief. So while COVID has been a factor in some of the worst behaviour experienced by front of house staff following Broadway's reopening, another front of house manager who has worked in the industry since the 1980s sees another major culprit: alcohol. So I've talked about this a little bit already, and I think that this is definitely a problem. And in so many of these stories that I've heard, where it's not about vaccine status and masking, where it's just about audiences that have become rowdy and aggressive, they're almost always drunk, aren't they? Like, that's the other detail that I keep hearing in these stories. "We never had alcohol around like we do now," this person explained. "You could have a drink in the lobby before the show, but you couldn't take it to your seat, so there was no nursing a triple and getting progressively more drunk as the show went on. Now we have people so hammered they can't even stand by intermission, and our custodial staff are having to clean up in-house vomiting at least once a month." That is another person who is not being paid enough for that job. Alcohol was first sold in Broadway theatres in 1964 during the musicals High Spirits, appropriately, and How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. While the custom was old hat in London, I apologise, it was a shocking addition to the New York theatre scene, garnering coverage in the New York Times and Variety. So this front of house manager currently manages a long-running musical. Intrigued. "I cannot overstate how much it changed things. A bartender at a pub has the ability to cut someone off when they're getting too drunk. They have bouncers to back them up. Our bartenders don't have the same ability to cut someone off because we're told to sell as many souvenir cups as we can. I'm sure higher-ups are making money hand over fist, but we're stuck dealing with unruly drunks almost every week. Oh wow, I've given more ticket refunds to people who were thrown up on by people sitting behind them in the last year than in my entire career combined before 2020. Good grief. Can you imagine being sat at the theatre and someone throws up on the back of your head? I mean, it doesn't even bear thinking about. How are people getting that apocalyptically drunk? So this is now from a part-time usher who was stalked by an angry patron. Horrifying. "I could build a chandelier out of all of the mini bottles of alcohol I found underneath seats during cleanup. Some seats look like a ransacked minibar at a hotel. 10, 12, even 15 mini bottles of hard liquor that they had clearly been drinking throughout the show, and that's just what they bring in." Are these things they are smuggling in? Because they ought not to be able to bring in drinks with them, but like I'd said before, people are pre-gaming, and this is the other problem. Tickets are expensive, so people feel like they have to make the most of their one night and have a really great time, which for a lot of people means drinking. And also, drinks are really expensive. In a lot of the theatres in the West End, and I know on Broadway, the drinks can be so expensive that people are going to go out and drink before and go somewhere where the drinks are cheap and have even more drinks and try and smuggle in drinks with them because they know the drinks are expensive. And all of this adds up to being really drunk, inappropriately drunk, in the theatre. And we just heard it from these ushers. They are being encouraged to sell as much alcohol as possible because this is often where these venues are making so much money. You know, and post-pandemic, Ticket sales have been taking their time to resurge back to pre-pandemic levels, but what's always going to be a reliable way of selling money? The drinks, especially when people were using drinking at the theatre as a way of taking their mask off of their face. And it's really difficult not to see this as a corporate money-making strategy that is culpable for this negative audience behaviour and the way it's affecting not only other audience members, but these poor ushers, this poor front of house staff team. I mean, it's just awful, some of the things that I've just been reading through. Not only that, the performers who are being disrespected on stage, and just everyone in that environment that seems to have become uncomfortably unnerving and dangerous. Right now I'm planning my first ever Broadway trip to see a bunch of shows in New York, and I'm concerned. I can't lie to you. Reading this has made me very concerned about the type of behaviour that we might be encountering. When pressed to identify a solution, and this is what I really want to start to think about, every source interviewed for this story agreed on one thing. Management needs to be more comfortable with removing unruly patrons from the theatre. By not having a policy for audience harassment, you're reinforcing that their behaviour is okay. This is exactly what I said before. If you let them stay, everyone else sees it, they notice it, and it becomes acceptable. The hesitancy to remove people from the theatre is dangerous. You just continue to put your employees at risk, and you continue to put the entire theatre and how people will treat it at risk. You notice that they were told there, if something was getting too dangerous, to just leave it alone. That's because they know that they are responsible for their employees, but they don't want to actually deal with it. They just want to tell the employees to just remove themselves from the situation, and they make it that employee's responsibility to keep themselves safe, rather than the management keeping their employees safe, which is their responsibility, make no mistake. And then this ends with just this really devastating paragraph here. Barring such a no-tolerance rule, they want one thing to be communicated to patrons, as clearly it's been forgotten along the way. We're human beings. For the love of God, just treat us like human beings. We aren't your servants. We aren't robots. We are human beings, and it's soul-crushing to be treated like a faceless, emotionless husk you can hurl abuse at. If you see someone lashing out against us, please step in to defend us. Don't just watch while someone throws a fit. This isn't going to stop until we stand up for each other. I mean, the whole thing is just incredibly toxic and horribly uncomfortable and legitimately unnerving. If anyone watching this is an usher who has any kind of a similar story of encountering challenging audience behaviour, you don't have to tell us what show, what company you're working for, but please let me know either in the comment section here or email me privately. I am both intrigued and deeply concerned for you all. So we've talked a lot about this negative behaviour, and we've talked about alcohol being a really big cause of this. But I do think at the same time, there is this tremendous amount of entitlement, because I've seen a lot of theatregoers and patrons who aren't drunk, but are willing to do the most baffling things. People just being on their phones and having full telephone conversations. I saw a thing on Twitter the other day of someone who was at Wicked on Broadway, and they talked about someone just making phone calls on their phone. I went to the theatre in Paris, and on the front row of this immersive cabaret seating show, someone was actually on FaceTime on their phone. And because it's cabaret, Sam Buttery as the MC was very quick to tell her in no uncertain terms to get off of that phone. Now, she didn't come back after the interval, this audience member, because she was clearly feeling so shamed that she didn't want to go and still be visible in the front row. So she's self-aware enough to feel embarrassment, but not to behave appropriately during a performance. But like people sending WhatsApp messages and Googling things, and like not even like who you would consider the usual suspects. I have seen all types of people, all ages, doing this in the theatre, and I feel like I'm only seeing the more ludicrous things more since the pandemic. I do think people have just forgotten how to behave in public and are so used to doing what they want, when they want, within reason, because we were all stuck at home. But people being glued to their devices and their phones because that's all they had as a way of reaching out and contacting each other. People now can't fathom going for like 50 minutes, an hour at a time without being able to get in contact with someone. I, for what it's worth, turn my phone off at every single performance that I'm at. I turn it back on in the interval because I live in fear of it. Like, I've never had a ringtone. My phone does not make noise ever. It doesn't even vibrate. I just see notifications. But I still, for no reason, live in fear of it making noise during a theatre show. So I turn my phone off, I turn my watch off. We need to talk about smartwatches as well. I see people like checking their messages on their watch and they think it doesn't count because their phone is in their pocket. It still counts, it's still annoying. And like, if you're going to be that disengaged with something, then don't come to the theatre. I appreciate you might have been dragged there by someone, but that someone wants you to see the show, or they want you to be there with them. So engage for, again, like an hour at a time, and then you've got an interval break, and then another hour. You can make it through that much of your life by just watching the very expensive and very rehearsed thing that is happening on stage. One more little thing. I told you that Playbill article had been deleted, and that is because it was pulled down by Playbill's CEO Philip Bursch, who also called it exaggerating and salacious clickbait. According to Philip Bursch, he has a very good overview of what things actually look like in a Broadway theatre, more accurate in fact than the ushers who are working there, and he thought that this was overblown relative to things that actually happen. He said, "We want people to go to the theatre. This piece exaggerated the issue in my opinion. I'm a numbers guy. I know numbers. I know that the overwhelming numbers of people at the theatre are having an enjoyable time. I have this image of this man with a clipboard and a survey, interviewing people as they leave the auditorium of every single Broadway theatre simultaneously. Why? Because he knows numbers." You remember when I told you I was a teacher? You know what kind of teaching I used to do? Maths. I was a maths teacher. I too know numbers, Philip. And I know that this sounds ridiculous. I know that you are just one man and you cannot possibly be daily speaking to every single audience member of every single Broadway show, because that does not make sense according to what? Numbers. Here's something I find very interesting. So as we are talking about what can actually be done to resolve all of this, here is some news that came out just this week here in the UK. So ATG, Ambassador Theatre Group, the owners of the Edinburgh venue that we were talking about before, who have recently, very recently, announced that they are planning to merge with a big New York theatre owner, Jim Sin. What's it called? Jujamcyn. ATG are merging with Jujamcyn, but ATG have come up with something of a strategy to attempt to curb some of the worst audience behaviour. And here it is. UK musicals have been told to tone down ads by ATG due to abusive audiences. What do we mean by that? Let me tell you. So shows will reportedly be asked to avoid using marketing phrases such as dancing in the aisles and best party in town to calm down rowdy crowds. According to the stage, the UK's biggest theatre operator is working with producers to alter any ads that may encourage such behaviour. A spokesperson said, "We're taking a multidisciplinary approach to tackle challenging audience behaviour, covering all parts of the customer journey, including how we market shows. We want everyone to fully enjoy the experience of a show, and we work closely with producers to create appropriate marketing material." A lot of this is on the back of Colin Marr's statement in response to the altercation in Edinburgh, and he's quoted again in this. It said, "Marr said, some ads may send the message that it's acceptable to sing along, but actually, if you're in the row behind, you don't want that." Very true. So what do we think? Do we think it's just the fault of posters saying the best party in town? I don't think necessarily that they are entirely responsible, but admittedly it is sending the wrong kind of message. If we want audiences to just be reserved and quietly engaged with the performance and not to be disruptive and distracting to those around them, then advertising it as a party is probably mischaracterizing the situation, especially to audiences who may not have been to a theatre many times before. I think as theatre people and as regular theatre goers, we could very easily take for granted that everybody automatically knows what it is that they're meant to be doing. Do we need a pre-show announcement for every single show describing in excruciating detail what people have to do in order to just behave respectfully towards each other? Hopefully not, because these are the things that even if you haven't been to a theatre before, you ought to know, right? Am I being unrealistic in saying that people ought to know how to behave and ought to be self-aware enough to realise they're being disrespectful to the people around them? Or do people legitimately think that everyone wants to jump up and sing and dance along, that that's everyone's version of going to the theatre? Maybe that is. I honestly don't know. But I also feel like this is not something that is about to go away very easily. Props to ATG for trying to take some sort of initiative here, and it talked about them having a multidisciplinary approach at all points of the customer journey. So hopefully we are looking at more than just the marketing when we are trying to address this negative behavior. But I think, at least in the immediate future, the front of house staff really need to be supported and backed up and protected and safeguarded in, I was going to say, the line of duty, which is super not what it should be called, when, again, they are just tearing people's tickets or scanning QR codes and showing them where their seats are. It's not supposed to be a job that involves combat pay. In any case, this is increasingly something we are dealing with at the theatre, and it is the responsibility of both those individuals to be respectful and of producers to ensure that it isn't easy for these situations to get out of hand. It's the responsibility of producers and theatre owners and managers to protect the staff and not engineer a situation in which this can all too easily unfold on a regular basis. But I am so intrigued about what you all think about this as well. So let me know in the comments section down below. What kind of terrible audience behavior have you seen recently? Do you feel like it's gotten worse since the pandemic? Why do you think that might be? Have you perpetrated some bad audience behavior before and maybe you want to fess up to something? Maybe we can all exonerate you in the comments section. Who knows? And what kind of measures do you think could be taken in order to prevent more audience misbehavior? Let me know all of your thoughts. I'm so intrigued, and like I said, hopefully I'll be doing another video in which I react to some more of these audience misbehavior stories, although I'm hoping they're more like the funny mango throwing running away cartoon woman, because some of those were really upsetting. Well, I hope you've enjoyed today's video. It's a challenging thing to talk about, but I do think that we need to be talking about it. And if you are watching this as someone who goes to the theatre, I'm here to tell you, please be respectful of the ushers, of the box office staff, of everyone you encounter in the building, and of your fellow audience members. We all want to have a great time, but please just be a decent and respectful human being and don't punch anyone in the face at Jersey Boys. I hope that everyone is staying safe, looking at you ushers, and that you have a stagey day.
For 10 more seconds, I'm MickeyJoTheatre. Oh my god, hey, thanks for watching, have a stagey day. Subscribe!